Good morning. Happy Zayin Adar, right? Zayin Adar, yeah. Moshe Rabbeinu's birthday and the art site, Lula. So we are continuing Ayin Beis summary review of its conclusion. We are on page 1448, is it? Yeah, 1448. Good. And a very interesting section here, or subsection, maybe we should call it, where the Rebbe Rashab just finished explaining the world of Atzilus in context of telling us what would a actual Gilui, a revelation straight from Atzilus, look like. And that's the events of Matan Torah at Sinai and the first Beis Hamikdash. That was called the Gilui of Atzilus Mamish. And that's why it stood out with the fact that it transcended the usual structure and boundaries that define the cosmic order and define human beings for that matter. And namely, when it says that Kol Ha'am, Roim Esakelis, that the entire people, entire nation saw the sounds. So we're told they saw the sounds and they heard the sights, but sight and sound are two very different faculties, and they don't overlap. They interact, but they don't overlap. And here, because it reached the level of Agdus Mamish, like he says, Lamaila Mischalkus, before, so to speak, these two functions branched off into like two channels, go back to their source in the soul, or the source Lamaila above, and you have that crossover where you could see sounds and hear sights. That was the Gilui of Matan Torah. That's a Gilui of Atzilus Mamish, because like you said, Atzilus is higher than its Chalkus. Atzilus is made up of a structure. There's 10 spheres. It's Chachma, Bina. It's not like higher than Atzilus where there's no spheres yet, or at least not 10 energies in 10 containers. So he explained, not because there's no structure, but because what dominates, what reigns, so to speak, what is the energy that dominates in Atzilus is not the distinctions, what he called the Bedreges Nevdolis V'Nefrodis, but the overlying, unifying divine within it all, which is an equalizer, a unifier. And we explained that in detail. He gave the example of B'china, why it's called B'china. Like the Alter Rebbe explains, why B'china? B'china means like a measure. Because the spheres are there, Chachma and Bina. Like one piece of silver, he gave the example, that has many things in it, but it's one piece of silver. So Atzilus is Elikus Mamish. Within it, there's the measure of Chachma. How much Chachma is there? How much Bina there is? That was the first thing he said. So what's the distinction? So what about higher than Atzilus? Higher than Atzilus, he said, Lo yesh Chachma Bina Klal. In Keser, is the Ratzon for Chachma, the Ratzon for Bina. So that's higher than Atzilus. But in Atzilus, it's 10, but they are all under the so-called, I don't want to use the word aura, but all under the influence of the Achdus of Atzilus, which is why it's called Elam Achdus. Yeah. Elam Achdus. Then he gave the example from Akudim. Akudim is 10 energies in one container. And elsewhere it explains it with the measures as well, with the etchings. The Beis Hamikdash, when they used it for measuring different liquids. So it's one keli, but one keli had different etchings, different markings for a hin, for one measure, for a half of hin. So there are markings. In other words, there is distinction, but it's all in one entity. It's one keli. Like 10 energies in one container. That's Akudim. You could say it's similar to Atzilus. Now, obviously, the distinction is that Atzilus is 10 energies in 10 containers. So it's not quite the same level of unity, but it's an example that he wants to bring how something can consist of several different components, but all in one entity. Good. And then he brings it back to the human being. We have the koyach hariyah, koyach hashmiyah, power to see, the power to hear, and they're separate from each other. Within riyah there's no shmiyah, within shmiyah there's no riyah, like he explained. Even though in their pnimiyas they're connected. In their sheidish, however, chachma bina, there they started getting connected because there's chachma there's bina within chachma, and there's chachma within bina. So now, if even a person, a human being, when you can distinguish and say there's a difference between what branches off into two faculties, sight and sound, when it's in its root, it's more connected. How much more so, Lamaila, he said, from this we understand in Atzilus, that Chachma and Bina, that where they don't yet have so much substance, that they're Bisachdus Gemura Zemzeh. They're totally united. And then he goes back to the original point. And that's why by Matan Torah, Sheheir, B'chinas Atzilus, where Atzilus was radiating in full glory, without the filters of the lower worlds, that's why Royim Nesanishma V'Shem Nesanira B'Lishum Mischalkus Klal. That's why they saw the sounds and they heard the sights. And so too, Kamoy Kain, the time of the Beis HaMikdash, it was the Gilead Atzilus B'Lishum Emtsoyis. So the Gilead was Kamoy Shehu. So we have a few things that we learned from all of this. Number one, what does a Gilead of Atzilus look like? So he gives an example, Matan Torah. Number two, we understand really when we talk about Sinai, Beis HaMikdash, we all talk Gilead Elokus, the revelation. Now we have Oisius words to actually describe what this Gilead is like. And that's where we stopped. So now we're up to, this is all till the Beis HaMikdash. Now I was going to go back to what happened after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. So that's what we're going to learn now, which will take us back to Yecheskel, which is when the Malachim come back into play, because you need the Emtsoi of the Malachim to support and help, as we'll learn momentarily. So let's continue learning. Close to the bottom, it's around 10 lines from the bottom of the paragraph. The next to last paragraph, page 1448. Pages can be found at ayinbeis.com if you want to follow. It says, Mashenke Golus. By contrast, in Golus, and Golus here means immediately, right after the first temple was destroyed, which is the Baisishin. And so began Golus Bovel, it's called, the Babylonian exile. The Gili Hashchina now that Yecheskel had, and he was a Navi, he was a prophet. Like we learned earlier, Ani b'seich hagela, because he was with the Gela, the Geli Bovel, the people who were exiled from Bovel. So he had a Gili Elikus, he had a Gili Shechina, but you can't compare it to the Shechina as it was in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. Says the Rebbe Rashab, what was the Gili Shechina to Yecheskel? Aidei ribu hischalkus hamadregas, through a multitude, through a number of the different levels. So you see the word hischalkus. Before we talked about it, he said Atzilus, even though there are levels, but it was all, you don't feel the distinction, because it's all the Gilei Elikus Elam Achdus, unified world. Here, the hischalkus hamadregas be slapshus, Pnei Aryeh, Pnei Sher. Because that's what his vision was. What was the vision of the Shechina by Yecheskel? So in the Beis HaMikdash, you don't say it was a Merkava, of a face of an Aryeh, of a lion, a face of an ox or a bull, and the other two faces. You speak about a Gilei Elikus, that there was Tzimtzum Shechinte ben Shnei Badei Adon, there was a Gilei Elikus without Memutzayim, like he said. Here, it's already taking on a shape. So it is indeed Gilei Shechina, I mean, it's higher. We don't have the Gilui of the Merkava later. So it's a prophecy that he had, a vision that he had, but it's now coming down already into a structure. Face of a lion, face of a sheir, of a bull, of an ox. The Bizmasha Beis HaMikdash Kayom, in the time when the temple stood, Hoyu Hanashamas B'mayla Helyena, the Neshamas were on a higher level. Hoyu Koyach Hasagosam B'Gilui Alakus B'Chlolus Hachayis, and their capacity and their comprehension of the Gilui Alakus was B'Chlolus Hachayis. They were able to see or experience and understand and perceive the general divine energy. Hainu, what does that mean? Etzem Atzilus. The Etzem Atzilus that's beyond the structure and the details. And that revelation was without interfaces or intermediaries, without filters. Now you can't say no mamutza at all because Atzilus is still lower than Kesed. But he means the Mitzrayim that would come in Biy'a, Yitzir, and Asir, like the Merkava, like he just described. But he says, Shalei Adem Mitzrayim. So there's no angels, there's no filters. Avol Kishagolu LeBavel. However, once they were exiled to Bavel, that wasn't just a physical displacement. It wasn't just they moved from Israel to Bavel. It was an exile. Beis HaMikdash was no longer standing. So that indicates a lower level of divine revelation. Now the Gilui is only from Malchus of Atzilus, not all of Atzilus Mamish. So we said, Golu lebavel, Shechina imah. The Shechina was with them. So they were not forsaken, God forbid. However, the Shechina now is Malchus as it's in Golus with them. So Malchus is descending into Biy'a, and contrast to what time of the Beis HaMikdash, Malchus is shining, like we learned, the sixth level, and equal stature with the sun, Zah of Atzilus. And this Gilui came through a descent that manifested and enclosed itself in the Chayes of Merkava, no longer Chayes Klolis, not just the general divine energy, but the divine energy as it's seen through the lens of the Merkava, of the chariot, of Pnei Aryeh, Pnei Shoyer, Pnei Nesher, Pnei Adam, Uberiba is Chalkus, and with much distinction and division. Division here, not divisiveness, but separation of levels. So it's still a Gilui Alakus, but it's a Gilui Alakus as it's coming into structure, and the structure is becoming more defined, as opposed to an Atzilus, where it's Alama Achdus, and it has the etchings, the markings. It has obviously spheres, but what dominates there is the pure Achdus of Hashem. Va'yodam, and through this Chayes and Merkava, which are like the angels, Nimshach Shefa Lekisla Neshama. The divine flow is transmitted to the Neshama. So in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, he says the Neshamas were a higher level, and they had direct access, they were plugged in directly into Atzilus. Now it's coming from Malchus, as it goes into the Golus Shechina in Bavel, and descending, and it's seen through the lens of the Merkava as Yecheskel saw it, B'Teich HaGeila and Golus, and that's how the Neshamas are receiving the flow, through the Merkava, which he's comparing to the level of the angels in Yitzira, as we learned. Or Matati said it earlier in Yitzira. The Mechol Ba'ava, Malach Mechol represents Ava, love of Hashem, the Gavriel Biy'a. Mechol, in the form of Ava, that's how he served, Chesed. And Gavriel Biy'a, Gvura. So already you see here, you're not just talking about Chesed and Gvura purely in Atzilus, you're talking about Chesed and Gvura as it manifests through a Malach. The Kamoy Kain, Ha'ava Yira b'Neshama, he mekabelas al yidei Malachim. So just as there's the distinction between these angels, so too, the Av V'Yira, the love and reverence in the soul, which is connected to Hashem, But now with Memutzayim, it's through the Malachim. Like we learned, the Hashpah comes through the Malachim. That's what happens in Golus. U'kamoshe kosav kimalachav yitzav lecha l'shamrecha al kapayim yusanucha. So I have appointed Malachim to protect you, and on their wings you will be lifted up, you will be uplifted, you'll be carried. Pirush, Rebbe Rashab interprets, Ki malachav yisav lecha liyis mashpia lecha. So yisav from there, it's like they're appointed to be mashpia to you. Because of Golus, we need those memutzayim, those channels. Like the king's ambassadors or ministers. Vehem yisanucha, and they will carry you, they will lift you. Sha'ayoda misnasas umisalas haneshama, through these malachim, the neshama is lifted and elevated. Al yedei pnei aryeh b'madregas ha'ava, pnei aryeh through the level of ava. Aryeh is again chesed yamin. V'ayidei pnei sheir, which is the gvura like Gavriel b'madregas ha'yira, in the level of yira. And just for the record, nesher, the eagle, is rachamim, like Tiferes. And Pnei Adam encompasses them all. It doesn't go into detail here. He just wants to bring the point out. So there you have it. So this long paragraph, basically page 1447 and 1448, comes to an end, where now we understand a deeper way the difference between a gili without Mutzayim, Atzilus Mamish, time of Matan Torah, and by sedition, the first base of Migdash, and the gili of Shechina in Golus, which is like by Yecheskel and Ibasech HaGeila, through the lens, through the filter, if you wish, of the Merkava, which now has Pnei Aryeh, Pnei Sheir, like Hashpah through the Malachim. What earlier he called Matat of Yetzirah, a Matat as it's in Yetzirah. Yecheskel Shorosh Hashchina de Merkava, so he compared that to Matat, I did Matat, back on top of page 1447. Okay, so relatively, so a little more elaboration than we're used to. I mean, some parts of Ayin Beis are very elaborate, some are less, but especially in the last section, some of it was very dense. This is a little more explanation, especially when he's bringing all the sources, so that we had all the different levels. But now he explained it in a Chassidus Chabad fashion of Atzilus and what is below Atzilus. So there are a lot of benefits of what we just learned, especially in understanding Atzilus, actually. It gives us a good insight of what Atzilus is like in its purest form. Okay. Now, on a very basic level, I'll just add one thing, and then I'll stop for any questions. It really comes down to using a simple example that we've used already. When you're a higher level student, and you're studying with your teacher, who's obviously superior to you, so you have direct access, and because you're a higher level, the teacher doesn't need to break it down into so many details or give examples. You can plug right in, and you get a direct gili straight from the teacher, what we call without mumutzayim. However, if the student, for whatever reason, is on a lower level, in this context, there's a Golus, things happened, and the student is not in touch quite with his teacher directly, so then the teacher, like a sun, you can't just plug into the sun. The sun is too bright, and he's too diminished. So that's why you have these Seder Ishtalshelus, you have lower levels of energy that are now going through filters. So that would be like the teacher either explaining it more, or the teacher using an assistant who helps him reach the students that are on a lower level. So it's still coming, obviously, from the original teacher, but it's now going through what we call here Mutzayim. That's essentially, in very balbatzer practical terms, explaining the role of angels. Again, Hashem can do whatever he wants, but he wanted to create a structure, a hierarchy, very similar to when Moshe Rabbeinu was advised by Yisro, standing all day, and everybody's coming and lining up to hear from you. Why don't you delegate? Sorry alofim, sorry meis, sorry asar. In other words, delegate to your students higher level, just like Sanhedrin, the 70 Sanhedrin, and then breaking it down even further. So the people can have someone to speak to, like a Rav, or a Mashpia, or a teacher or mentor, and if need be, the question isn't answered. We'll pass it up to the next level of the hierarchy. So the question is why Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't figure that out himself. I mean, such a brilliant idea, delegation. Because Moshe knew that Hashem had sent him to be the conduit. Moshe Kibbutz Torah Sinai. So his responsibility was to give he's the Nasi Adar. Like even when we learn about Basar, when Moshe says, Ma'ayin li Basar, I don't have meat. Even then, and it's delegated to the Sanhedrin, it doesn't just say it was given, it says, Va'atzalti min haruach. Atzilus. Moshe is Atzilus, or actually Moshe is higher than Atzilus, we learned. And God imparted from Moshe upon this Canaan. Why? Because Moshe is the leader. Everything has to go through Moshe. What Yisrei accomplished, and it was Dafki Yisrei, explained to him that you could retain the integrity of your leadership and what you're conveying, because Moshe heard it straight from Hashem, through training and educating and delegating it to your students. That was the chiddush, not the general idea. Of course you could delegate, that you could actually maintain the integrity, preserve the integrity, while also transmitting it. But it's now through Memutzayim. There are Memutzayim. I'm just using it as an example. It's not a perfect example, because it's not like the Malach, because the same idea is also when Hashem said, after the Chet HaEgel, the Malach. Just making this a little more palatable to be able to relate to it with examples in our own lives. Okay. Any questions? We finished the paragraph, bottom of 1448, and he's still going to go back. There's a little more about, remember, there's a distinction here we have now between Matan Torah, Beis Hamikdash, Moshe. We have the Avos we learned about. We learned about the Yidden in the time of Moshe. Learned about Yeshua, and now also Yecheskel that comes after the Golus, meaning after the destruction of the first temple. So as I pointed out already, we have here a bunch of different levels, and it's a very good I guess barometer, if you wish, that can be used to understand in general when we talk about different levels of revelation, what level is which. Now he doesn't speak here about later Golus. Remember, there's still a Bayis Sheni, and then there's the destruction of the second temple, and then the Golus Edom that we are in now, that hasn't finished yet, with Mashiach's coming. But you can extrapolate from this already and apply it to obviously deeper Golus and a deeper Golus. I'm not going to do that right now because the Rebbe Rashab hasn't done it. We'll see if he alludes to it or not, but just making sure that we understand that you can piece together and extrapolate and figure out how this would work with more concealments. Because remember, Yecheskel was a Navi, he was a prophet, and he saw the Merkava. So as much as Golus, it's still a higher level than later levels. But as I said, he doesn't discuss that right now. He did discuss it earlier, I mentioned, when he talked about Talmud, a Mikra Mishnah Talmud, and then after Talmud, the generations later, until he said that there were later generations that were that Osad Ruach HaKodesh, but I don't want to go into that right now. It'll just confuse matters. Okay, let me stop here.
In Golus itself, there is a difference. Is today the Marshal is a much bigger darkness.
Right here, Yecheskel says, Ani b'seich hagela. He was in Golus Bavel. And we know
there's a difference between
Bavel is not like Golus Edom, for example.
But in Golus itself, not before.
Of course, there's levels. I just gave you exact. Golus Bavel is Yecheskel, a Novi. Golus Edom, you don't have a Novi.
But the Rebbe brings the Rambam that the Soif Hayomim Tachzoyer HaNevuah LeYisrael.
So what are you telling me that Golus that Yecheskel and Golus Edom is the same level?
I'm asking.
For sure, it's levels. It's not even a question. The fact that we call this Dora the Ikvisa de Mashiach. As the generations go, there's more halamas of a stadium. Sure. Then, obviously, before Mashiach's coming, there's Teimer Zachu, but before the dawn, it gets darkest, and then there's going to be the biggest revelation. Definitely, the Golus. It says clearly, if you look in the Maimorim Tafshin Tes Pesach, where he brings the different levels of Golus. Golus Bavel is a higher level. When Daniel had his vision of the different Cheshes, Zov, right, and Cheshes, Barzel, etc., that right there tells you those are different levels of Golus, and the Mefarshim all explain it. And in Kabbalah Chassidus, it's a barichas in the spheres. Like for example, Golus Edem and Golus Yishmael. The Arizal says he brings there in the Maimon Tafshin Tes is Netzach and Hoid, Bovel and Modai, Paras Modai, which is Paras Modai is like now a story of Purim, is after Bovel, are higher levels. Mitzrayim is the Reish Kol HaGolius, Keser Shebech. Yeah, so there are levels. Yes, that's the bottom line. Okay, are there any other questions? So let's continue on. Rab Shlomo, welcome back. We all missed you.
Thank you. I try to find sometimes in our soul, it's clear like it's here. Your voice and everyone's voice. Thank you.
Good. So let's continue now. The bottom of page 1448, new paragraph. V'hinei is taking us back now to the last page about the Avos. Remember, the Avos was a level between Moshe and the Nevi'im. Moshe is Aspaklari Ha'me'ira, transparent vision of Elokus. The Nevi'im is Aspaklari She'ena Me'ira, a translucent, meaning it's clouded or it's with a partition. Aspaklari She'ena Me'ira literally means a non-illuminated glass, if you wish, pane. And he said the Avos was Aspaklari She'me'ira through Aspaklari She'ena Me'ira. So it's a combination of both. So it's like a level in between. And he said that the people in the generation of Moshe, he said Yeshlema was like the Avos. I'm reading back from page 1447. Just let me look at it again, make sure I got it right. Yeah. Good. That's why it says Moshe Nisnava Bezeh. Moshe prophesies with the Zeh. Zeh means direct. Noichach. Zeh. Say Zeh Yitnu or Zeis. You're pointing to it in the same Marba as well. It's like right before you. And the other Nevi'im Misnava Bekoi. Koi means like. It's like comparing it to something. You're not seeing it directly, you're seeing the likeness of something, similar to something. Like Koi Amar Hashem. So he said, yeah, you have similar by it says Chatzeis by Meitzis Mitzrayim. Okay, so he says like this now. V'hinen is barely ill. We learned now. It was explained earlier. The ba'ovas hayigili b'chinas aspar klari hameira ayde aspar klari she'ena meira. So it was directly from the source, like direct Atzilus, but it was through a pane or through a lens, if you wish, that's called aspar klari she'ena meira. Then other Nevi'im is the Chatchilas Paklaya She'ena Meira. Here, it has an element that's coming from that source. So he says, Dahainu, what does that mean? Sha'yidei HaMalchus, he says, Hoyelehem Gilib Chines Atzmus Atzilus. They did have a Gilib Atzmus Atzilus, but it went through Malchus. So Moshe had it straight from Zoh. That's what we learned. Shem Shimsha Be'ina. Moshe was like Pnei Chama. He was directly linked to Zoh of Atzilus. The Avos, it's Zoh shining through Malchus. So they are getting a revelation of the core of Atzilus, but through Malchus. V'zeh b'chinas ha-Malchus k'meshu b'Atzilus. K'meshu hi b'Atzilus. This is as Malchus is in Atzilus. Not as Malchus comes down into Biy'a which we learned Yeshua or Matat, once it descends into Biy'a. This is all this is all as it is in Atzilus. Umadrega hanal. By contrast, now he's comparing it to the other levels when we say the Malachim. The Avos, it doesn't say they had needed Malachim for the Gilead Lakus. So next page, 1449. Umadrega hanal. The Madrega we spoke about earlier, in Cheskel, or in general through the Malachim. Sha'ashpaya de Malachim, that the Ashpah comes through angels, that's not the level of the Avos, that's through Malchus of Atzilus. Zeu amshachi b'madregas hashvatim. So now he's introducing another generation, another stage in history, the Shvatim. The Shvatim, of course, are the 12 Shvatim of the children of Yaakov. So this is already a generation after the Avos. So how do they fit into this? So now he's going to describe their level. They too are a level. So they're lower than the Avos, and they're getting the Ashpah like through the Malachim, which is already Malchus, not Atzilus, because if it's from Malchus, not Atzilus, like the Avos, there's no Malachim yet. Even though you could say, what about Matat as it is in Atzilus? So he doesn't address that here. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. But it's still not the Malachim below Atzilus, that's for sure. Yeshua, for example, is already below Atzilus. He's a leader, and that's why he accepted the Hashpah from the Malach, Matat, because it gave him a taste of what was coming from above. In Biy'a, he was able to get a Gilead of Atzilus. So now he's comparing the Avos and the Shevatim. Okay, so that's the opening statement, and that's what he's going to address now. So the Rebbe Rashab is basically filling in the map. And at the end of this, we'll have the Avos, the Shevatim, Moshe, Matan Torah, of course, the people during the time of Moshe, Yeshua, Biy'a Rishon, and then Yecheskel, or the Golus Bavel after Biy'a Rishon. It's a real structure here that covers quite different, many stages. So now he's going to explain the difference between the Avos and the Shevatim. Okay, so he says like this: the Hine, we're on this, on the first top of the page, 1449. The Hine ha'Avos hayu bechinas merkavta ilah. So before I continue, let me explain. When we spoke before about Merkava. Merkava is a name used, literally means a chariot, a vehicle. What's a Merkava? Let's talk physically. When a king or anyone wants to travel from one place to another, so the king has a chariot. The chariot is completely bottled to him. Chariot doesn't have an agenda of its own. It's not going elsewhere. It's carrying the melech that sits on the Merkava. That's why Merkava is the example used, the word used when Yecheskel saw the Merkava. Zechariah saw a Merkava, was another prophet. So you find the Merkava. You say, Avos, hein ha-Merkava. The Avos were a Merkava. But there are different levels of Merkava, obviously. So Merkava is simply a way of explaining a vehicle. Something that's a vehicle to the king is completely bottled to the king, but it's not the king himself. So when you say Merkava, you don't mean Zav Atzilus, you mean a Merkava. Is it the level of Malchus? Is it the level of Biy'a? So generally speaking, you probably have heard, we learned this, that Biy'a is sometimes called Kursaya. We say, Bina Mekanino B'Kursaya. Kursaya means Kisei, Elam HaKisei. So another name for a Merkava can be also throne. I think I'm trying to recall if Chassidus distinguishes between a Kisei and a Merkava. There probably is a distinction. But the bottom line is that it's a similar idea, because what's a Kisei? Hashemayim Kisi. It's God's throne. And then there's Eretz Hadem Ragli, his footstool. These two are all vehicles for the king. So Biy'a, generally speaking, is called Merkava. Question is there the different levels of Merkava, which we're going to talk about now. So generally, we speak about two levels of Merkava. Merkavta Ilah, the higher Merkava is the Merkava of Atzilus. That's like the Avos. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. And Merkava Tata means the lower Merkava, the lower chariot or vehicle, is the Shvatim. They're already carried into Biy'a. Yecheskel Merkava is in Yetzirah. I think Zechariah's Merkava, if I recall correctly, is it higher or lower? I don't remember right now. So there's different levels of Merkava. So now he's going to say like this: Tehine ha'ovis hoye b'chinas Merkavte law, b'chinas chagas d'Atzilus. So we say ovis heina and Merkava were meant like the Sefer HaBoyer says that Chesed of Atzilus says to Hashem once Avram was born and Avram was walking this earth. Chesed says to Hashem, "What do you need me for? You have a walking Chesed on earth. Avram has replaced me." So Chassidus explains because Avram was a Merkava to Chesed. He embodied and personified Chesed on earth. So that's Chagas Atzilus. And the same thing, Yitzchak, Pachad Yitzchak is Gvura, and Yaakov Tiferes. Liash Shoyi B'chinas Bittul Mamish, because that Merkava, meaning of the Ovis, was Bittul Mamish, utterly selfless, utterly nullified, like a real Merkava. There's no will of its own. All it is carrying the king, carrying Hashem where he wants to go, so to speak. That's why in them radiated Mamish Atzilus. Yes, through Malchus, through Aspaklaya She'ena Me'ira, keep that in mind, like he said. So Moshe is higher than this, and let's see if he discusses that, but if not, I'll explain it a little later. That's the Ovis. The Ein Sof Umidesav Yizbarach Hema Mizgalim Benafsham. Very strong words. That Ein Sof, the infinite divine light, and his attributes, Midesav Yizbarach, God's divine attributes, in other words, God's Chesed, Hashem's Gvura, Hashem's Tiferes, Hema Mizgalim Benafsham. That's what was revealed in their nefesh. So they were literally Chesed of Hashem, Gvura of Hashem, Tiferes of Hashem. Not just that they were doing God's bidding. Wasn't that like we? Mahu chanun afata chanun. Just as God is a Baal Chesed, He's kind, we should be kind. That's when we give tzedakah, or gemilas chasadim, or you invite someone as a guest. All the chesed we do, we're emulating God's chesed. But it doesn't say that we are embodied 24/7. In Tanya Perek Chav Gimel, when he describes this, he says, when you're giving tzedakah, then your hand becomes like a vehicle to chesed of Atzilus. But then he goes on and says, but the Ovis was a constant process. They were an embodiment of chesed, period. There was no other agenda ever. So that's what Mizgalim Benafsham. For who in Avram Oyavi, and that's what means Avram Oyavi, my beloved, Upachad Yitzchak, and Yitzchak Gvura, Pachad, the reverence of Yitzchak. That they embodied that. Val Yodam, and through the Ovis, Nimshach Liyas Gili Ein Sof B'chlal Neshamas Yisrael. Remember, Ovis, Maisa Ovis Simil Labanim, we carry the DNA, and we are the Yarshim, we inherit as the children of the Ovis. So he's saying, from them, this Ein Sof, Liyas Gili Ein Sof B'chlal Neshamas Yisrael, this Ein Sof that they have, coming through them, is Nimshach in general, all the Neshamas Yisrael, but B'chinas Gili, in a revealed form. In other words, if we didn't have the Ovis, Chaz v'Shalom, there'd still be Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes of Atzilus, but it'd be lacking like a interface. It's like saying, yes, of course a person can achieve great things on their own, but if you have a parent who's trained you, and more than that, who's given birth to you, and you inherit their genes, it's going to be a lot simpler and easier for you to achieve that level, as opposed to getting it straight, so to speak, from the source. So that's what we said, that the Ovis are mamshich, these levels within the Shamas Yisrael B'chlal, in a form of Gili. Be'etzem Behelam, it's in every neshama no matter what. But we learned earlier that neshama comes down below, it's concealed. The Ovis are like he doesn't use the word Einei Ha'eda, but think of it like the eyes, they help illuminate it. So the eye could see, but the eye in a dark room needs an outside light. So part of that process. Again, he doesn't say here explicitly that the Avos are like Einayim. He said that on Malachim, he said it on Sanhedrin. But in concept, why you could apply it to them as well, because they do provide for us direction and clarity. We say Ma'aseh, and we learn from them, and more than that, we draw from their energy into us.
But they needed a chesed. How could a chesed say that Avraham is instead of chesed? Avraham got it from chesed.
But he didn't just get it. He says here he is it.
Without chesed, Avraham could be replaced chesed? What does it mean?
Why not? If a person is so bottle, he is now chesed. Whatever chesed Atzilus is, that has become Avraham.
Chesed means that Hashem is putting himself mitzamtem in chesed, and from that it comes to us.
And that now is Avraham. Avraham is now that chesed. He's embodying it. That's the level of a Merkava. That's why it says the Avos and a Merkava. It's more than just someone receiving. We also have chesed in us that we receive. But you're talking about a Merkava. You're talking about bittul mamish. You imagine the Avos are higher level than the rest of us, completely higher level. Well, look in Tanya Perich Gimel and a few other places where he says, Kol Yemehem, 24/7, he embodied chesed. Avram was chesed of Atzilus on earth. That's what Chassidus says. Okay. V'hainu. And what does this mean when they're mamshich Erein Sof into neshamas? V'hainu liyas hadas v'akora belakus ki'ilu raya. That they provide us with the ability to have a perception, not just chachma bina, das, like iskashus hakora, a recognition, a day of hakora, like so a resonating recognition that you recognize as if you see something. So in other words, without the Avos, a person can contemplate on godliness. But through the Avos, we get a sense of like actually seeing it. Not mamish seeing, but ki'ilu roya. So it's a whole different level of recognition that the Avos give us. It's like similar to the difference between a person who hears a story from someone that something happened, or if you hear it from your own father or mother that it happened with them and they tell it to you in all the details, very different than when you hear it from a third party, more distant. So this is like receiving it directly from our parents, literally in our genes. Doesn't say those words, but that's the teichen. So now comes the question, so this is great, so what's missing? Why do we need Shevatim? And then why do we need Malachim? So he's going to say. But before I continue, any questions on this piece? What the Avos do? Now this is pretty short and bekitzer here. There are other Maimonim that talk at length about the role of the Avos, Merkava. Here he's just concentrated just in a few lines, but he conveys the point quite powerfully. Yeah. So now he says, Ach, however, loy kol nefesh tuchal se'es gilizeh. Not every soul is capable of carrying and containing, you could say absorbing or even integrating this gili. It's a very high level gili from the Avos. And the neshama, as it comes down below, as we know, it gets concealed. And not every neshama is at the same level, so not every neshama can access quite, or more than that, he says, Lo Tuchel says, can contain, can absorb, can integrate this level of gili. And that's why, in order for this revelation to enter and be received by Chol Yisrael, by all Israel, that comes to the next stage, the branches of the Shvatim, the tribes. Shehem b'chinas markafta tata. In contrast to the Avos markafta ilah, the higher chariot, now the divine energy is coming into the next level, what's called the lower chariot. B'chinas Yud Beis Bakar, the 12 cattle, which is a level that corresponds to the Yud Beis Shevatim, the 12 Shevatim. So Bakar here obviously doesn't mean physical cattle, but like a Merkava is a chariot that's led by, it could be horses, it could be other animals, and here it's Bakar. So that's the level of the Shvatim. So Yud Beis Bakar is a level in Kabbalah and Chassidus that explains. We discussed it earlier. If you want to go back, Yud Beis Bakar, he referred to. It was on top of a page. Actually, I think I even skipped it because it was a little complicated. Yeah, here we go. Page 1429 on top. He spoke about, that was about Meyai, Homo Meyai. So he spoke about the Yud Beis Shvatim and the Yud Beis Bakar. So he brought there from Torah Eir by Yeshev that they refer to 12 high levels of, think of them 12 channels. So in the Pasuk it's called Yud Beis Bakar. But in Ruchnius it's referring to this lower level, the lower Merkava. Yud Beis Bakar de Biy'a. Now we're talking about in Biy'a, not in Atzilus. Shehu inyan bitl hayesh. It's not the bitl b'mitzias, bitl mamish that he called the Avos. Now it's bitl hayesh. So the Shvatim, of course, were also a high level. But they're not the Avos. They're not the patriarchs. That's why they're called Shvatim. Shvatim also comes from the word shevet, like branches. So they're like branches of the Avos. And he calls that an Aveda bitl hayesh. So what's bitl hayesh? Bitl hayesh is you also have a level of sublimation into the divine, but the yesh remains in existence. By the Avos, he's talking about bitl mitzias, like he said, not every neshama can directly connect to that, or access that, or integrate that. Whereas here it's coming bitl hayesh. It sends us to the Maimer Torah Eir, the Alter Rebbe, b'dibur hamasel v'yashkim loven b'boker. So that's the Pasha with Yaakov. So after Yaakov is returning with the Shvatim, so the Maimer v'yashkim loven b'boker, Loven wakes up in the morning and realizes that. So there he talks about this more in detail.
They were also Atzilus?
He says Biy'a. Yud Beis Bakar de Biy'a. Okay. And now he's going to explain a bit further how this fits in with the Malachim, where they fit into this. Yesh Leimer, Sham Shachash Ha'idei HaShvatim, Hilamayla Ma'am Shachash Ha'idei HaMalachim. Says we could say that this transmission through the Shvatim, the tribes, is higher than the transmission through the Malachim. Shara Merkava the Shvatim, and he's now making the case for that. Because the Merkava, the chariot of the Shvatim, the Merkavta Tata, the lower chariot of the Shvatim, Mavur B'Habiy'a D'Vanina Sati, that the Biy'a D'Vanina Sati is a Maimer in Torah Eir in the Esophagus. Says there it's explained, Shezeu ha'ara ha'atzilus shenimshach lebriya. That the Merkava of the Shvatim, he says, yes, it is in Biy'a, but it's a reflection coming from Atzilus that manifests in Biy'a. U'bechibra Atzilus ima Biy'a nasa b'chinas Merkava. And by this joining of Atzilus and Biy'a, that's what causes it to be a Merkava. Because remember, a Merkava is always bottled to the Reichev. Whoever's riding in that chariot, they control. The chariot doesn't have a separate agenda. So even though it's a lower Merkava level, because it's a lower level of bitl than bitl hayesh, than Merkavta ilah of the Avos, but it's still a Merkava. So it's true, it's already in Biy'a, So there is an existing entity, but that existing entity is aligned with Atzilus. That's the chibur of Atzilus and Biy'a. That's what causes it to be a Merkava. That's what he explains in the Maimer Bir Vanina Sati. That's a pretty high level. Not as high as the others, but still. V'nizbar le'il, and we learned earlier, it was explained earlier, shezeo madrega shvi'ah, that this is the seventh level, shemischaber habriya im Atzilus. So we learned that it's the seventh level. You may recall with Bina going down all the way to Malchus. I have to find the exact page. But bottom line, he's just strengthening the case here, solidifying the case that this is Taka Biy'a, but Biy'a is joining with Atzilus. So the Shevatim, who were the children of Yaakov, basically brought Atzilus into Biy'a. Im Kain harizel lamayla mimadregas hamalachim shehem madregas Biy'a atzman. So based on this, you have to say it's higher than the malachim because the malachim is the level of Biy'a itself. The malachim is not the level of Biy'a as it connects to Atzilus. Even though you could say, 1 second, didn't we learn that matat is a level of matat and Atzilus is a level of matat below Atzilus? So firstly, he may be talking about malachim b'chlal, not matat. Second of all, even matat is still, the main focus of matat is to carry it down, even though it originates from higher. So you can make distinctions just to qualify that. So essentially, that's the difference between so the Avos is lower than Moshe, by the way. The Avos is still going through Malchus, but it's Atzilus itself. The Shevatim is Atzilus as it manifests in Biy'a, and the Malachim is Biy'a itself. That sums up what he just said right now. Are there any questions? Because the next piece, I'm going to stop here probably. The next piece is in Aveda. He's going to explain this in Avedas Hashem. What's the difference in Aveda between the Avos and the Shevatim?
So matat
Which of
could
course
be
will
an
help us.
exceptional.
1 second. So this will, of course, once the Aveda will help us understand this difference. What are you asking?
Matat,
We lost you.
Yeah, I couldn't hear his question.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your answer. I don't know.
I didn't hear your question. Didn't hear your question.
No, my question was, is possible that matat is different from all the other malachim?
First of all, I just asked that question and I answered it two different ways. I said the fact that we learned earlier that matat originates in Atzilus. So firstly, you could say matat is different because he called matat the mamuna and the melech of kol ha-malachim. Secondly, even matat, its main function is to come down into Atzilus, into Biy'a. So you could distinguish it from the Shevatim. He doesn't specifically speak about matat. I'm just giving two ways to explain how matat fits into this. But malachim for sure are lower than the Shevatim. So the simplest way to just explain it is that malachim, he's talking about all the malachim. Well, Michal before he said is matat. But Michal, Gavriel, or the Pnei Aryeh, that's the basic way to explain it. Matat, I don't even know if he goes back to matat, interestingly. Yeah.
You said Michal is matat. This is something new to me, at least.
Well, because you weren't here in the earlier classes where we learned more about matat in this context. I would take you back, go back to page 1446 where he explains the level of matat.
That makes sense. Michal is Torah Shel Yisrael.
He talks about that on page 1446. Okay.
What is the reference to cattle and the tribes? What's the connection? Why is the Yud Beis Bakar? Like, why? Is it
the cattle is a level that talks about Shlomo Melech talks about it and a few others in the Psukim, and Kabbalah and Chassidus explain that Yud Beis Bakar referred to the Yud Beis Shevatim, which is the level of bringing down to Biy'a. I refer to page. If you want more, look on page
1447. I think you said.
1429.
Yeah, that's what you said.
In the Kiev,
top
in
of-
Beis Hamikdash, it was standing on Yud Beis Boker.
Right. That's what he talks about there. The Yud Beis Boker in the Beis Hamikdash. Yeah. It says, Yud Beis Boker im hayam ha'emed aleim. It was the image of the 12 Boker, yeah. And I think in the Maimer, maybe in Vayeshev Terer, he speaks about it as well.
Do you remember, besides that reference, the symbolism at all? Any meaning in the idea of 12 cattle?
Like I said, like a Merkava is led, a chariot is always led by animals.
I see. Okay.
There's probably more to it. I don't remember right now, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I would have to look it up in the sources.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to stop here, but we're going to stop before the Aveda. He's going to explain the difference in Aveda between the two. And we're winding down here about all the role of the Malachim and the role of all these interfaces that help us in our Aveda. So we have quite a few support systems here, as we've learned, if you go through all the levels that we've discussed. Okay, we're moving along.
I have a general question about these different levels of revelation of Elikus, and in particular as they relate to different times in Jewish history. So that notion I can understand, because the Yidden are, let's say, closer or further from the Eibishter in terms of the way that they're letting godliness manifest in their lives and their connection with the Eibishter, and it's that makes sense. But the notion that we can access different levels, let's say at Atzilus, like really high level, in our day when we're in the low, like the worst Golus, like that's the part I don't quite get. There are these different levels.
So who says we could access? That's why we need the Mumutzayim to access it.
Bingo. Okay. I see. Sometimes we've said, like when we're doing our avoda,
Everything is relative, because you could ask the question: what about a Yom Kippur? Do we access the same thing? So it's all relative. As I said, it's always relative to where you are, your avoda. On Shabbos, it says that the elements are oila in Tatzilus. So obviously Shabbos is more Atzilusdik, let's say, than the weekdays. But it's still not Atzilus of the Avos. You can imagine the Avos on Shabbos is higher than us on Shabbos. So, we have a Moshe within each one of us, and yet the full-bodied Moshe is a higher level. It's all levels. It's never going to be black and white. It's always relative and always nuanced
and dynamic. Yeah.
Everything is relative. We say every day, Neshama shenasata b'tahirehi. We're told that's Atzilus. And then we say Ata barasa, Ata yitzarta. So do we have that Atzilus within us? Yes. The question is how many filters, and how are there moments that a person can touch Atzilus easier without all the filters? Yes, of course. There are moments of inspiration, moments of tshuva. There are times where there's a surge. But when you talk in general, once the dust settles, everybody's got their level that you have to work with. So of course there are moments, epiphanies or Eis Rotzen, where God blesses somebody with a particular, we say a person gets married. It's like Yom Kippur for them that day. But it's only that day, So it's all, you have to think of it in terms of, these are all, I guess the best way to call it is archetypal levels that you have to figure out then where they apply and how they play themselves out in your life.
Thank you. That was extremely helpful. Appreciate it. So
Okay.
nice way to round out the section.
If I can imagine all this dust that they have about Eberstein, and our does about the same Eibishter, I would say their locator, their sensor, could have the full picture of everything in all sphere of relationship, godliness. Our locator device is very limited, and for that we need actus of all Shvatim to see the full picture of our locator and understand Eibishter better in comparison with others. Can I apply this picture?
Yeah,
About locator, how to say, locator device that had the
locator. How do you spell that word?
Locator is the device that scan the, for example, the sky to see what's going on with the flights.
Like a radar?
I think she's trying to say locator, like GPS locator.
Locator, yes.
I don't know. If it works for you, it works for you.
Device for ours was more advanced than our locator. And for our locator to work, we have all Shvatim together to see the full picture.
If the example works for you and helps you understand what it says here, by all means. Personally, for me, yeah, I understand. It means say they're more sensitive, they're more sensitized. You could say that, but it's probably a lot more than that. But like all examples, they have their benefits or their limitations. If it works for you, I don't, that's all I would say. I have nothing really to add.
For me, it's I'm looking forward for your teaching, Father, just to apply it, because we need the full instructions for this locator to work for us.
Listen, if it helps you understand what we're learning here, by all means. I don't necessarily feel I have the need to use that example per se, but as I said, it's always good to personalize. If you can find something that relates to you and makes you understand it better, that's good.